The first time Zara pulled a chair up to my desk without asking, I knocked my coffee sideways and caught it with my elbow like I had never interacted with gravity before in my life. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She set her laptop on the corner of my desk, angled the screen toward me and said, "Your drop-off data is lying to you." I was Corbin Shaw, 29, UX researcher at Vantage Analytics, a company that made enterprise data dashboards and convinced itself this was exciting. My job was to figure out where users gave up inside our software, where they clicked wrong, hesitated too long, or quietly closed the window and went to do something more pleasant, like organize a sock drawer or reschedule a dentist appointment they'd been avoiding since August. I was paid to notice the gap between what people said they wanted and what they actually did. I had been noticing Zara Caldwell for 4 months. Not like that, or exactly like that, but I'd been pretending otherwise since sometime in January. She was Vantage's senior product strategist, which meant she sat in rooms full of executives and translated their half-formed ideas into something the engineering team wouldn't walk out on. She showed up prepared in a way that made everyone else feel slightly embarrassed about their own preparation. She wore dark blazers over simple shirts, always carried a small red notebook with a spiral binding, and tapped the corner of it against her palm when she was thinking hard about something she hadn't solved yet. I knew this because I noticed patterns, professionally and apparently against my own interests. The chair thing had started 3 weeks earlier. We'd been assigned to the same client workstream. Meridian Health Systems, a regional hospital group out of Colorado Springs that wanted to modernize how their clinical teams interacted with our platform. It was a big deal. The kind that, if it landed, Vantage could stop pretending the kombucha tap in the kitchen was a benefit anyone cared about. Zara had decided that emailing me feedback was inefficient, so she came to me. Every day, a little before 11, she'd drag a chair from the empty desk beside mine and sit down like she owned the square footage. The drop-off on the report builder. She said that first time, tapping my screen with 2 fingers. Users aren't confused by the interface. They're confused by the options. There's a difference. I looked at the data. She was right, which was irritating because I had spent 2 days building a theory about button placement. You could have emailed that, I said. She looked at me sideways. I could have also sent a fax. She stayed 20 minutes, stole one of my pens without asking. When she stood to leave, she glanced at my monitor and said, "Your axis labels are too small. Nobody over 45 can read those." "Thanks," I said. "I'm being helpful." Deeply. She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. That was the thing about Zara. Almost was a whole conversation with her. I had rules about this kind of thing. The way you get rules after a specific incident turns you into a person who makes rules. 3 years earlier, at my first job out of grad school, I had misread something badly enough that it cost me 6 months of comfortable mornings. A coworker named Angie, warm, funny, always asked about my weekend, had been friendly in a way I translated into interest. I asked her out at a team happy hour. She was gracious about the no. Her boyfriend, who also worked on our floor, was less gracious about telling everyone. I became a recurring punchline in a way that was technically harmless and quietly devastating, and I swore I wouldn't move first again unless I was unreasonably certain. Zara made unreasonably certain feel like an impossible standard. She remembered things. In February, I mentioned offhand that raw CSV exports gave me headaches from the formatting inconsistencies. The next week, she left a printed color-coded summary on my desk with a sticky note that said, "For people who hate CSV exports, you're welcome." In March, she argued with our boss Gail for 20 minutes until Gail agreed to give our junior researcher Tomas proper credit on the Meridian proposal instead of filing him under team support. I was drawn to that, not just to the way she looked in a dark blazer, which, fine, yes, I noticed, I was not made of stone, but to the way she paid attention. To work, to details that were easy to miss, to people who were easy to overlook. She paid attention the way I paid attention, except she then did something with it, which was the part I kept getting stuck on. On a Thursday at 2 in the afternoon, she appeared at my desk and said, "Conference room by the windows. Bring your Meridian files." I wasn't invited to. I'm inviting you. The room had a view of the Rockies on clear days. That day was clear. We spent 2 hours building a user journey map on the whiteboard, while the mountains sat there being unnecessarily beautiful about it. Zara drew fast, functional diagrams that somehow still looked elegant. I filled in the behavioral data underneath. At some point, she handed me the marker without looking and said, "Do the hesitation cluster. I know you have thoughts." I did. I wrote them. She read them and nodded once, which from Zara was roughly equivalent to a standing ovation. When we finished, she stood back and looked at the whole board. Then she said, "This is the best work I've done here." "We," I said. She looked at me for a moment. "We," she agreed, and something in the way she said it made me study the window instead of her face. It was the following Monday that Gail came to find us. Meridian moved up their visit, she said from the conference room doorway, carrying the energy of a woman who had already decided how this conversation would end. 2 days early, and our pitch lead just called appendicitis. Zara and I looked at each other. "You two built the deck," Gail said. "You know it forward and backward. You're presenting together." I should have been worried about the presentation. I had one concern, which was standing at the front of a room for 90 minutes next to Zara while pretending I hadn't been quietly, inconveniently interested in her for 4 months. Zara glanced at me. "He needs a better jacket." I looked down at my blazer. "What's wrong with this jacket?" "It says dependable analyst. It should say this team is trustworthy with your patient data." Gail blinked. "Is there a jacket distinction I should be tracking?" Zara was already moving. There was a supply closet at the end of the hall, where facilities kept overflow items and, apparently, a rack of blazers left over from a company photo shoot 2 years back. She pulled out a slate gray one, held it up against my shoulders, tilted her head. "This one. You're not seriously. Try it." I tried it. It fit better than my own. "You do this for all your coworkers?" I asked. "No." She adjusted the lapel, her fingers quick and precise. "Just the ones who look like they're about to walk into battle thinking about what they look like." "That's oddly specific." "You think too much." She looked up at me from the lapel, closer than was strictly necessary for jacket adjustment. "Not about the work. About yourself inside the work. It gets in your way." I had a response ready. I lost it somewhere between her fingers on the collar, and the fact that she was looking at me with the same focused attention she gave a problem she actually cared about solving. Then my phone buzzed on the shelf beside me. "Unnumber," the message said. "She's only staying through the Meridian pitch. After that, she's moving on. Don't get attached." I read it twice. Zara was still looking at the jacket, pulling it marginally straighter, and hadn't noticed. "Don't get attached." The phrase did something specific to my chest that I had no professional framework for. "Corbin," her hand had stilled. "What is it?" "Nothing." I slid the phone into my pocket. "The jacket's good, thank you." She looked at me, the way she looked at data she wasn't sure she trusted yet. 1 full second of assessment before she let it go. The rehearsal that afternoon went well. Better than well. Gail walked out afterward and said, "I don't know why I was anxious about this," which, from Gail, was effusive praise. Zara bowed slightly. I didn't bow because I was occupied with not noticing how the afternoon light through the windows had done something uncooperative to Zara's expression when she laughed at a dry joke I made about user abandonment rates. Darnell stopped me on the way back to my desk and said quietly and with the good intentions of a man who could not read a room, "For what it's worth, everyone already thinks you're together." "We're not." "Sure. But you look at her like she's a dataset you're scared to misread." I had nothing to say to that because it was accurate, and I resented it. At 6, the office thinned out. I was packing up when Zara appeared at my desk with 2 paper cups from the good coffee place on the block, not the machine in the break room, the actual shop, which meant she'd made a deliberate trip. She set one in front of me. "What is this?" I asked. "Walk with me." I walked with her. We ended up at a small plaza 2 blocks down with wire chairs and heat lamps, the mountains gone pale pink in the last of the daylight. She ordered a carnitas bowl from the food truck parked at the far end. I got a green child cheeseburger because I had been in Denver for 2 years, and I had developed standards. We sat at a small metal table, and she set her red notebook on the surface between us, which I had never seen her do outside the office. "What's in the notebook?" I asked. "Things I don't want to lose track of." "What kind of things?" She turned it over once, a small gesture, mostly work, some not. I had 17 follow-up questions. I kept them to myself. We talked for nearly an hour, not about the pitch, which she seemed to have mentally filed away, but about everything else, the kind of conversation two people have when they're testing whether the other person has a second layer. She grew up in Fort Collins. Younger sister who was funnier than her, she said, by a significant margin and without contest. She'd won a regional product design award at 24 and never mentioned it at Vantage because, she said, Gail would have worked it into every client introduction for the rest of her natural career. "That's smart," I said. "It's practical. You're very practical. You say it like it's a limitation. I say it like it's something I noticed." She went quiet for a moment. The heat lamp buzzed. Someone behind us laughed at something. "What else have you noticed?" she asked. I had been waiting for a version of that question for months. I had also been slightly dreading it. "You tap the corner of your notebook when you're working through something you haven't solved yet," I said. "You always give people the longer answer, even when the short one would do, because you'd rather they understand than just agree. You argue for the people in the room who can't argue for themselves. You remember things people say once in passing and bring them up later, like they mattered." She looked at me across the small table. The mountains were nearly gone now, just a dark outline against a lighter sky. "That's a lot to track," she said. "It's my job." "It's your personality," she said it plainly. "The job is incidental." Neither of us said anything for a moment. Then her hand moved across the table and her fingers rested over mine. Not accidentally, not as a joke, not in a way I could rationalize into something smaller. Her hand was cold from the cup and warm where it touched mine, and my entire nervous system quietly rerouted itself. "I notice you too," she said, "more than is probably advisable." "I've been trying not to do this for 4 months," I said. "I'm bad at it." She turned her hand over. I held it properly. "I like you," I said. "That's the simple version." "I like you too." Her voice was steady and a little quiet, more than is strategically sensible. I was going to say something to that. I had something ready. Then her phone lit up on the table and she looked down, and whatever was on the screen took the warmth out of her face in under 2 seconds. I looked before I could stop myself. "A contact saved as Roland V," the message said. "Don't commit to anything in that room tomorrow. We need to talk first." She turned the phone face down. "Who's Roland?" I asked. I kept my voice level. "Old manager, flat, careful, from my last company. He's telling you not to commit to anything in the pitch tomorrow. He wants a lot of things." She picked up her coffee. "He usually does." "Is he going to be in the room?" A pause. "Probably. He's consulting for Meridian now. He texted me the same day he took the engagement." My stomach did something complicated. "And he's reaching out before a presentation where you're one of the leads." "There's a VP role at his new firm." She set the cup down. "He's been presenting it as an opportunity." "What is it actually?" She looked out at the plaza, at the string lights, at people moving past, at anything that wasn't me, and then she looked back. "It's a way to keep me close. He's always worked that way." I was still holding her hand. She hadn't taken it back. "What happened between you two?" I asked. "Nothing personal," she said. "He was my mentor for 2 years at my last company. He was brilliant at the work and he knew it, and after a while, knowing something gets confused with owning it. He started weighing in on everything, who I took meetings with, which roles I should consider. He'd frame it as investment." She paused. "It was investment in his version of me." I stayed quiet and let her talk. "The VP offer isn't a promotion," she said. "It's access to how I think, how I work. He's done this before and I walked away from it once, and now he's structured it so that turning it down looks like I'm being irrational." The heat lamp buzzed overhead. Somewhere a door opened and let out a burst of music that faded just as fast. I stood up, then immediately sat back down, because standing had been a reflex and I didn't want to follow it. I wasn't leaving. "Okay," I said. She looked at me carefully. Okay. If he's going to be in the room tomorrow, he'll try to reframe things, make confidence read as naivety. He's subtle about it, which is what makes it work. Data is hard to reframe. It is. She looked at me. It's part of why I wanted you specifically on this. I walked her back to the parking structure. At her car, we stopped and stood there in the way that happens when neither person wants to be the one to leave first. She reached into her bag and held out the red notebook. I looked at it. What is this? The pitch opening. I wrote it out last night. She hesitated. It's also where I keep the things I don't want to lose track of. You're giving me both. That's the point, she said. I nearly kissed her. Almost again, the word that had followed us for 4 months. Instead, she said, "Get some sleep, Corbin," and got in her car, and I stood in the parking structure, rethinking my entire position on hesitation. I was 2 blocks from my apartment when my phone buzzed. Unknown number, different from the first. The message said, "Ask Zara what happened at the Aldercroft account before you stand up there with her tomorrow." I read it 3 times. I turned around. She was still in the parking structure. She got out of her car when she saw me. "Aldercroft," she said before I showed her the message. She'd already read it in my face. It was a health insurance client at my old company. Roland's company. Roland's company. She leaned against the car. They wanted a behavioral analytics report for a member retention campaign. Roland wanted to frame the data so that low claims activity looked like customer satisfaction. People who hadn't filed anything in 2 years, he wanted to call them loyal customers. She looked at her hands. Most of them just couldn't afford the deductible. I felt something tighten in my jaw. "I rewrote the report with an honest interpretation," she said. "I copied the client's compliance officer when I sent it because I didn't trust Roland to relay it accurately." She said it without drama, just fact. The client paused the project to do an internal review. "Roland told our company I'd gone rogue, that I'd torpedoed a 6-figure account because I couldn't handle being overruled. You protected the people in that data." "I did," she said it quietly, "but he's good at the long game. He'd say things like, 'I understand why you thought you were doing the right thing,' and for a while I'd catch myself halfway to agreeing with him." I stepped closer. "I believe you." She looked up. "Just like that?" "I might want verification, professionally. Data and I have a committed relationship." I tried for a small smile. "But I don't need his version before I start from yours." Something in her face shifted, not the sharp, composed version of her I knew from the office, but something less managed. "Don't be decent about it," she said. "It makes everything harder." That's an unusual complaint. I'm an unusual person. She reached out and touched the front of my jacket, the slate gray one. "It does look better on you." "The jacket?" "You." She said it before she could second guess it, and then she didn't take it back. I covered her hand with mine. "Whatever he tries tomorrow, you have the story. I have the data, he has neither." She looked at our hands, then at me. Then she said my name in a tone I had never heard her use, like she was setting something down she had been carrying for a while. I kissed her under the parking structure lights, which was not the setting either of us had probably pictured. But she stepped into it like she meant it, and when we broke apart, she stayed close with her forehead almost against my shoulder. "That was not a calculated decision," she said. "No. I'm choosing not to care." She pulled back and looked at me. "I haven't accepted the VP offer. I haven't turned it down either. I want you to know that going into tomorrow. I'm not asking you to decide anything." "I know." She tucked the notebook back under her arm. "I just need you to know that whatever I decide, I'm deciding it. Not running from something, not staying for something." She looked at me steadily. "Mine." "Understood," I said. She almost said something else, caught herself, and smiled instead. "Go home, Corbin." The next morning she arrived 8 minutes after I did, in a dark navy blazer I hadn't seen before, and laid the slate jacket on my desk without a word. I put it on. She fixed the collar with 2 fingers, the same as before, and this time let her hand rest there 1 moment longer than was technically necessary. "Ready?" she asked. "Not even slightly," I said. "Let's go." Meridian's team was already in the conference room. 12 people around a glass table, and in the chair to the left of their CFO, a man in a charcoal suit who looked up the moment we walked in and smiled at us with every tooth. Zara stopped a half step. Roland was mid-50s, lean, the kind of good-looking that had probably read as trustworthy once and now mostly made him harder to interrupt politely. He raised one hand like he was greeting old friends. Zara, and this is Corbin. It is, I said. I shook his hand because I was not going to give him anything to work with. Zara's shoulder touched mine as we moved to the front of the room. She didn't look at Roland again. She opened the presentation the way she'd written it in the red notebook, not with an agenda slide, not with an overview, but with a question. She asked Meridian's clinical operations director to describe the last time one of her nurses had given up on a task partway through. The woman looked momentarily surprised, then described it specifically and plainly. Zara thanked her. That moment, she said, is exactly what we're here to address. The room shifted. You could feel it. The difference between an audience waiting to be impressed and one that has just recognized something real. She handed it to me when the story needed proof. I walked through the behavioral data, click paths, hesitation clusters, the specific workflow steps where clinical staff quietly abandon tasks, and I made it readable. I talked about people, not percentages. I pointed to decision points where someone had needed something and the system hadn't given it to them. At the midpoint, Roland's hand went up. Compelling presentation, he said pleasantly. But for an organization scaling to a national footprint, I'd want to make sure we're not leading with sentiment at the expense of operational metrics. He smiled at the room, the kind of smile that rents space in a conversation. Zara has always had a gift for the human angle. We might want to ground this a bit more concretely. Zara turned toward him the way she'd turned toward a dataset that was trying to mislead her. Operational metrics are downstream of adoption, she said. If clinical staff abandon workflows, the metrics don't accumulate. She clicked to the next slide, unhurried, which is why we build the model from behavior first. I stepped up beside her. We tested two versions of the onboarding flow. The one optimized for speed showed a 31% task abandonment rate in week 1. The one optimized for decision support showed 11%, and at 90 days, workflow retention was 64% higher. I clicked once. The chart was clean, sourced, and extremely hard to argue with. Those are the operational metrics. Roland didn't speak again. When Meridian's CFO said, at the end, "This is the first presentation today where I understood both what you're proposing and why it will work." Gail made a sound from the back of the room that she would later describe as a cough. Roland left without saying goodbye. By noon, Meridian had asked about contract timelines. By 12:20, Zara and I were alone in the small conference room, the Rockies outside looking the way they always did, permanent, unmoved, completely indifferent to the fact that something had just ended that needed to end. She turned to face me, and her hands were shaking. I had not seen that before. I reached for them. "Hey." I turned it down, she said. "The VP role. I called Roland's firm this morning before we walked in there." I went very still. "Don't," she said, reading my face. "It wasn't because of you. I need that to be clear." She met my eyes. It was because I looked honestly at what I'd be walking back into. His building, his narrative, his version of my career, and I realized the cost of it. Not to a relationship. To myself. She looked down at our hands. "You're a different reason. A separate category." "What category?" She looked up. The one where I stopped pretending I wasn't paying attention. I pulled her toward me, and she came without hesitation, and the kiss was less careful than the parking structure, more certain, the kind that doesn't feel like a biggest thing so much as an acknowledgement that something had already been true for a while. Through the glass wall of the conference room, somebody definitely saw us. Two people, probably. One of them started clapping before someone else stopped them. Zara laughed against my mouth. "We're going to have to file a disclosure form. Gail's going to make us use a specific font. She'll return the first one." "She already knows," I said. She was never worried about the pitch. Zara leaned back, eyes narrowing. "She told you that?" She didn't have to. She looked at me for a moment, then, You notice too much. It's my job. It's your personality. She said it the same way she had in the parking structure, like she was returning to something she'd meant to say for a while. The job is just where it shows up. 3 months later, Vantage signed Meridian. Darnell sent a fireworks gift to the company Slack, and Gail pretended not to save it to her camera roll. The disclosure form got filed and approved, and on the day it came back stamped, Zara left it on my desk with a sticky note that said, "Officially not a secret." Tomas got lead researcher credit on the Meridian case study, which Zara had written into the project parameters in February, 2 months before any of this happened. 6 months after that, on a Tuesday that looked like every other Tuesday, Zara dragged a chair up to my desk without asking, the way she always had, the way she probably always would, and opened her laptop on the corner of my workspace. "Your segmentation logic is off," she said. "Good morning." "Good morning." She didn't look up. "It's still off." I looked at it. She was right. This was the case more often than not, and I had stopped finding it inconvenient somewhere around month 3. I pulled my chair closer. She shifted the screen so we could both see it, her shoulder warm against mine, the red notebook sitting between our coffees on the desk. She was quiet for a moment, thinking something through, and I saw her hand move. Fingers tapping the corner of the notebook once, twice, the way she always did when she was working on a problem she hadn't cracked yet. I didn't pretend I hadn't noticed. I leaned in and asked her what she was working on.